There you are. Okay, great. So you're back on the video. So Anya focuses on work that connects people and nature, and she has 15 years of experience in the conservation sector with a strong emphasis on finding the balance between what's good for the earth and good for the people. In 2021, she was selected as one of 20 African female conservationists to participate in the first cohort of Women for the Environment in Africa. Aaniyah is the founder and director of a non-profit organization called The Beach, a co-op, and works part-time for, is it West Eastern Africa? And Homeward Bound, the latter two organizations that focus on women's leadership in STEM and the environment. She's a registered PhD student at the Environmental Learning Research Center at Rhodes University. Absolutely delighted that you're part of this panel, Anya. Very welcome to you. Then the second person on the, we haven't got any other animals on the panel. No, we just have, well, humans. Zayaan Khan is a transdisciplinary artist using the local urban and ecological relationships to understand the elements that build ecosystems. Through curiosity, research, experimentation, and engagement, her work finds a resting place through food as a means of understanding the world. Oh, that's nice. Thank you, George. Particularly seed, land, sea, and our collective heritage. Influenced by tradition, both inherited and the creation of new ones, reclaiming culture and reviving tradition through progressive interpretation in order to enact a listening of the future and steady present survivalism. Sorry for reading this out really badly. Zayaan is currently completing her PhD entitled From Seed as Object to Seed as Relation through the Environmental Humanities South at the University of Cape Town. So thank you for being here as part of the panel. And then we've got authors and also editors of this book, Viv Bozalek, who's honorary professor at the Center for Higher Education, Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. She's also a emerita professor in Women's and Gender Studies, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, University of the Western Cape. So her research interests and publications include the political ethics of care and social justice, post-humanism and feminist new materialism, innovative pedagogical practice in higher education, post-qualitative and participatory methodologies. And she's got so many publications. I can't really start by mentioning them all, but you can find them on the internet under the also on the editorial board of this collective. And then we have, last but not least, Nikki Romano, who teaches history and theory of design at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in the Western Cape. Her artistic research interests explore the relationship between thinking, making, and doing through a post-humanist and feminist new materialist frame. And there are also quite a few publications there that, but let me just, our most recent are Touching Text, Feeling My Way Through Research Creation in the journal Qualitative Inquiry. So you two are very much welcome. And I would like to in particular thank the people, the hardcore of our research groups, of a reading group, who have generated the questions that we're going to focus on. And if you wouldn't mind sharing those, so that were collected over the different chapters, and then I'm sort of putting them together. I sort of put them together under the main headings, but they are the questions generated during those sessions. So thank you for those. And I'm absolutely delighted to see the people who generated them actually in the room. So first of all, methodological questions. And there were lots of very fascinating methods that were adopted during the writing of the chapters that we looked at in the reading group. So they were slow scholarship in chapter 3. Slow amphibious scholarship was mentioned in chapter 10. Dreams was chapter 8, and water was chapter 5. So we come back to this in a minute. Then the second part of the methodological questions was, how do animals like the octopus work as figurations, maybe metaphors, figures? And this is also a very interesting question, because in another reading group, what we have found that those figures, figurations, and configurations are used differently in the literature. So that's will be very rich question to explore as well. Then what I put together on the onto-ethical political questions is to put them all, because of course in post-humanism they are all interrelated, especially in the kind of post-humanism a lot of us are interested in, which is agential realism. So this question I've left more or less as it was. And can the more seasoned, gezout academics of chapter 10, so that is Viv and Nikki. Unfortunately, Tammy, who would have been here, the other editor, is actually on her way. She's traveling to the north, so she wasn't able to be here. So the two of you, say a bit more about putting together a book with such very diverse writers in terms of academic experiences, cultural backgrounds, also in terms of how the philosophy, hydrofeminism, did its work. And the gezout, Sherry, comes from you, doesn't it? I can remember. And then how does this relate to justice to come? Whose justice? And can you say more about its temporalities? So we explored a little bit about justice to come, but I think there was a kind of urgency to that question, and how just is our higher education practice if so bound by time and money constraints. So coloniality, which is also linked to the other question about, okay, justice to come, but is that innocent of any bias? And who were the authors considering when they were writing? And so I thought they're probably all quite linked to those main questions about who is the book for, who was it written by, and then what I forgot to mention, that in terms of the methods, there was a very interesting connection made between the relationship between death and ocean, especially in relationship with chapter 8 and other different values of death. So a lot for us to stuck into. And the way we usually structure it is we take one question at a time. Is that right? And then we could do all questions at a time and then open it up for further discussion. Or has anyone got a strong preference? How are we going to go about it? Shall we just maybe do all three questions? Or, well, there are sort of two questions with sub-questions. And then depending on how far that gets, then open it up for everybody. Yeah, shall we do that? Okay, so who would like to so yeah, you can look at there. Who would like to start with the methodological questions? So maybe you can speak to that. One is your chapter, slow scholarship, slow amphibious scholarship, dreams and water.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I hope that my internet connection stays active. Yeah, I thought I'd jump in around slow scholarship and the methods that I've been using for my research inquiry, and what slow scholarship means for me. So the methods of inquiry are very much a doing an embodied approach. So for me, the strandlooping or beach walking is a means for me to enter that space, that environment, and perhaps I have questions, perhaps I don't, but there may be interactions with the humans and the more than human entities that I encounter that help me think and respond to the inquiry that I may have. So that's the walking method. And it was through this embodied approach that, I was able to observe things. And one of the entities that I met was the Proteanatida, which I talk about in the chapter. And that led me on this path to understanding the Proteanatida and understanding what it was used for in the past. It's known as the verbworm as well. And it was through reading more about the Proteanatida and its habitat and where it lives as a community. So it's become a figuration as well. It speaks to the second question. A figure that is also identifiable with my family lineage. So a family tree. Because at the same time that I discovered the Proteanatida through walking, through the slow scholarship of walking, I was also drawing. So part of the process for me when I'm doing my research, drawing, painting with watercolors, knitting, that's part of my way of processing my research, the inquiries that I make, the responses to those inquiries, and the iterative process of this research through call and response. And so drawing became something I did, and I happened to be drawing an image based off a photograph that my mom had given me. And there again, what I discovered through meeting Zayaan Peterson, who helped me track my ancestry and discover who this woman was by visiting maqbaras or graveyard sites, going to the actual archives in Cape Town, and then discovering that my mom's family actually owned a family-run business in Plain Street in Cape Town, and they rented horse and carriages, and the wagon wheels were made from this Proteanatida verbworm, from the stem of the Proteanatida. So that for me is my way of performing slow scholarship. I don't know if that.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, if there's more you want to ask, yeah.
So it was very much tracing then, tracing the more than human.
Exactly. And what I said to Viv at the launch the other day, because I was thinking about relationships when I spoke at the launch of the book in Cape Town, relationships came up for me, and coming from a science background, I call myself a recovering scientist because I was never a good scientist. But where the binaries are so stark, and coming into this field of post-humanism, agential realism, and really unlearning those processes and arriving in slow scholarship with this way of seeing the world and being able to feel the world, sense making with the human and more than human, has been such a gift for me. It really has. I look at the Proteanatida, and what I shared with Viv, as I was saying, is that the Proteanatida was something that was found all over the Cape Peninsula. And with the Group Areas Act, Black and brown bodies were forcibly removed and placed on the Cape Flats. And the Proteanatida was prolific on the Cape Flats. But because of that movement of people onto the Cape Flats, the Proteanatida population has reduced substantially, and you can't really find them in the Cape Flats. So there's this uncanny relationship with the Protea Natida and the Cape Flats and black and brown bodies as well.
Thank you. Anyone who would like to directly respond to what Aaniyah has said, or would like to, add more to it, or especially about slow scholarship and slow amphibious scholarship, which wasn't explained and we were puzzled about.
I can try and come in there. But first, two things really. First, just to say, Aaniyah, you speak so beautifully, and you say you weren't a good scientist, but I think you're a brilliant scientist because you taught me so much in all those weekends we spent in Simonstown at Bosquedale. And I mean, you were my go-to person to teach me about those creatures and seaweed that we were eating and all of that. So, and the second thing is I'm so not a Gesota cherry academic. But in terms of slow amphibian, I think what in our chapter, what we were doing was so much of, we were writing, thinking, swimming, reading together on land and in the sea. And it was an iterative process. So much of what Aaniyah has referred to, I feel like is something that really resonates, certainly of my experience of what we were doing in what became chapter 10. And there was something about slippage between land and sea, and how the land, we'd arrive at the pool or wherever we were swimming, and a conversation would happen, a kind of convivial, whatever, how are you, this happened, that happened, and then go into the water. And so what had happened on land kind of infiltrated or flowed into what happened in the pool or the sea. And likewise, whatever encounters we had there would then come back onto the land and would find expression through our collective writing together. And what I found interesting as well, that it wasn't just that kind of, it's not even the literal, but we could say that literal zone. It also, because we were doing it on a regular basis, each encounter would bleed into the one before and the one after. So I can't really think of anything more to say about the kind of slow amphibian specifically. I don't know, Viv, if you would want to add anything.
I think what I would add is the kind of porosity, the slipping between land and sea, what comes to mind. And one of the things that I've written about as well is tidal pools as containers of care. So this, the way that the tidal pool creates this environment, but water still is able to move over and through and in between.
I've also thought quite a bit about it. I wasn't going to talk about it as the kind of amphibian now. I thought we might talk about it more when we talk about our specific chapter, but I think of it slightly differently in terms of care and carriance and how you can be carried in a fluid space without walls. And what I found with this practice is that I was there writing my PhD, and I was swimming with two very experienced academics, and Viv, as most of you probably know, is my supervisor. So it was I felt very grateful and privileged to have that opportunity of having supervision in such a much more or a kind of such a different way to what I was witnessing with other friends and colleagues who were being supervised in a kind of more traditional way. But certainly that kind of sense of porosity again comes out through the practice, but that's more around the writing together and reading together. I found it so interesting how often we would be writing about the same thing, albeit differently, that almost in ways that was bigger than us, things would surface through the process of the writing and reading together. And in that way, it made me understand things that it really certainly helped me with my PhD, forgive me if I'm rambling on too much, but I felt it was really gave me an opportunity to really understand. Again, you mentioned embodied, Aaniyah. It's like in an embodied way to think through what responsibility might mean, what care might mean, what attunement might mean. And so we would sometimes write to a prompt about something we were thinking about, or sometimes the prompt would come from the encounter in the water. So there wasn't a kind of fixed way of doing it, but it certainly helped me to much better understand, what I was trying to, it was at the end stages of writing my PhD that it really helped me, find those words that were necessary. Yeah.
Thanks. So I don't know whether any other members of the panel, Zayaan, whether you would like to talk about the slope, but maybe about the other method at your chapter, and also I mentioned death and how that sort of really featured in your chapter, life and death. I don't know whether you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I guess my scholarship in its entirety is super slow because it's very much I am a vessel and the path is kind of laid out before me, and so I can only but step or swim or crawl or sleep my way through it. And I, in my gifts, am able to receive many guidances from ancestors and through dreams and from land that I'm able to interpret to guide my entire life. And so how I use that for scholarship is in the many ways that I teach and in the gentle ways that I write, but it's also using the different materialities that I use in my artistic practice that also kind of speak to, it's basically an ultimate sharing and being able to decipher these kind of drips and the drippings of stories that I can compile into a cohesive method, I guess. And I'm also I just want to take this opportunity to really say thank you again for all the editing, because this chapter, out of all the publications that I've ever done, was really the most private. And I've never spoken about these ways of working and these things that I've done ever in public ways. But it was really important to speak to because they're precious and they're sacred, especially because ultimately I understand that my work is grief work, and it's processing those traumas that are embedded and are stuck in the land, and often the processing of those traumas is about water. It's about pushing out those buried griefs through tears and through ocean, which is much the same thing. So I think as a methodology, it's very unique, and it's nothing that I've created. It's just something that's kind of happened through me with time as agency and the guidances of amazing editing.
So I think one of the things that kept coming up is there's often reference to slow as not being slow, in terms of time. So I suppose the question, and we don't have to answer that now, why call it slow? Especially listening to all you've said so far, like it's a doing and it's embodied and it's thinking with and being with and swimming with ancestors, and we can park it and engage with it with the others as well. And please, if people want to have some questions that are bubbling up, put them in the chat.
I'm happy to
I'm
respond.
happy. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Bo. Do you
Go.
want to go?
You go first.
Okay. I thought about that a lot on my walk or my swim before coming to this meeting, to this panel discussion. And for me, it is about slowing down as well. You know, I'm in Betty's Bay at the moment on a writing retreat, and driving here from Cape Town, I have driven along Clarence Drive before, and there's road works at the moment. And I knew that there was some Protea nitida plants growing along Clarence Drive. And I had to drive slowly. I had to take my time. I had to make sure that I could spot them and park my car in a convenient place so that I could get out and climb up the mountain and go and find some leaves so that I could make the plant dye when I got to Betty's Bay. And that's what I've been doing since I arrived. I've not only been writing, I've been making another plant dye, which takes time. And it wasn't only harvesting from the land. I also needed to find rusty nails. And luckily enough, there was some kind of building must have happened around the house, and I found some rusty nails. And I'd brought the cane sugar along with me. So there was this process of boiling and cooking and gathering and foraging. And then I let it rest overnight. And today is when I took the time to dye it physically with my hands. So, you know, it's an embodied approach, yes, but it definitely is slow as well.
Viv?
Yeah, so I've been interested in slow scholarship. I think people know about that for some time. And it really comes from the slow movement, which started with food and started with protest about a McDonald's being put onto the steps opposite a cathedral in Rome. And people, you know, started celebrating the enjoyment of food, of local food, and you know, enjoying it together, and looking into, you know, the details of what they're eating, concentrating on what they're eating rather than eating unconsciously on the hoof or while watching something else. And you know, it's taken over in academia. Karin, for example, has written about slow reading and is very much about doing slow. Isabel Stengers has written a book on slow science. So it's, you know, it's not only academia, it's sort of, there are all sorts of disciplines that have written about slow discipline with a capital S, which does distinguish it from what is known as slow. So it's really, people talk about doing things that matter to them, rather than engaging in things because they have to. And that is, you know, well, that was the beauty of swimming and diving and learning from each other in the water, and then being able to, I think, you know, as Nikki said, I learned a lot, you know, just swimming with Aaniyah and with Delphi and feeling very safe, you know, swimming long distances with them and having so much pointed out. So I think it's a medium where, for me, one doesn't necessarily feel at home, and it then allows one to pay attention to what is going on. So it's that amphibious slow scholarship was a huge lesson, and, you know, a joyful one, a different way of doing academia. So yeah.
Is that also connected, Viv, to the octopus as figurations, metaphor or figure? The amphibious.
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure because I think it was Delphi that wrote about the octopus, but I have written a chapter with Dorothy Holscher in a social work book on the octopus as figuration. Also being inspired by those octopus meditations which Maggie Roberts did, and how the octopus sort of seamlessly alights on things and becomes those things. So yes, we have written about octopus's figuration in terms of social work ethics. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think unless people want to dwell more for now on the methodological questions, I know that there is already one question that was put in the chat, but is it okay, George, if we hang on to that one? Yeah. And of course, just to say that our reading groups are slow reading groups and also often disrupt kind of linear time in terms we don't go from the beginning to the end of the book, and we hop depending on where the inquiry leads us to. But yeah, I'm sure that there is a lot more that we can ask about that and discuss too. There is also, I mean, there's a lot being said now about the water. Is it okay to move on to the second question with all its sub-questions so that at least we have plenty of time for people in the audience? So just to remind us, can the more seasoned Gezout academics of chapter 10, so the two that are here, of course, Nikki and Viv, say a bit more about putting together a book with all this diversity of academic experiences, cultural backgrounds, and probably also other kind of differences, also in terms of how the philosophy of hydrofeminism did its work. And you might want to bump into other questions, or we might just look at them differently, separately, about justice to come. Okay, so who was writing, who was editing, who was it for? So
it's interesting with kind of retrospectively trying to trace that process, but certainly for me, it kind of hydrofeminism did its work in that the book evolved and is there, but it started off as a chapter. Or no, it didn't even start off as a chapter. We just used to do this as a practice. I'm just speaking from the three of us. And then there was that workshop we had in, was it Fulmut, Viv? You actually talked about it at the book launch.
Yeah, I think where it started, just to interrupt you, was we had a Cape High Education Consortium series of workshops which Brenda Leibovitz and I started, and one of them was on slow scholarship. So that was in, I think, 2019. And we had that slow scholarship workshop, which involved WITS and the institutions in the Western Cape, where we had a swimming event there. And that's where we started writing about, swimming and writing.
Yeah.
I remember Sherry was there, and then after that, we had the New Materialism Conference, and Tammy and I presented a paper on swimming after that workshop. We had a few events, and then we fortunately got two research grants. One was the NRF, and the other was the South African Swedish Fund. So that was Elmarie, Costandius, myself, Nikki, and then Hilevi, Lenstagucci, and others
Tammy,
in Tammy, yeah, in Sweden. And we had a series of workshops there. And then we had fortunately put into the NRF grant, getting cameras and doing courses in free diving. And we were able to have writing and swimming retreats. So many of the people, most of the people actually who wrote chapters were attending our lovely writing retreats at the sea. So I remember it was 2020, perhaps, that we had one in Simonstown, where Aaniyah, I think you were there, Joanne was there, and Sherry was there, Tammy, yeah, Delphi. And we were reading Astrid and Neymanus
at the
those,
Venus School.
Yeah, yeah. So, and yeah, and we continued sharing things on, you know, through WhatsApp, having more writing and swimming and reading workshops throughout the year. And then we had another big one in Simonstown the following year. Dylan also joined us, and Claire, I think. And yeah, so that went on for 3 years. And that's how, you know, this colloquium was really part of that NRF project. And so, you know, most of the people in this book were at that colloquium, either presenting online or there physically. And then we decided, as we said at the book launch, to approach Karin about putting the manuscript into the series. And I mean, for me, you know, those retreats and our interactions between them were part of hydrofeminism, which is reading, writing, swimming, thinking about the hydro commons. Yeah, it was a process which developed into this book.
Okay. I don't know whether that is an answer to the people who posed the question, but we will be able to hear that a little bit more later on. But I think this is also a broader question that includes Aaniyah and Zayaan, because you were also, you know, part of that whole entire process. So it's potentially quite a complex achievement, isn't it? Because it is about all these differences. And what I would always like, you know, the way Karin Barat puts it about differences without binaries, and then how does that work, you know, in this case where, and I think some of those questions are about that, without erasure. And you know, what is this notion of justice to come that is worked with? Is that innocent of any bias? And you know, when you were writing this and editing this, so it's not only about editing, you know, who were you writing for? And I can remember, just for people who didn't know this, that as a chief editor of this series, I had to really argue my case to get this, and I mentioned this at the last panel, to get this book through the review from the Routledge reviewers, because they really felt that a book that was only featuring South African scholars, you know, why should that be in an international series? And my reply was immediately, and I was also quite cross about it, is that most books would, when they're edited collection, it's not a problem when they're only, or everyone from the States, or everyone from Europe or England, you know, like in lots of edited volumes. So yeah, I mean, you must have been giving that some thought. So it is maybe bound together being South African authors, but that in itself is also not homogeneous. So maybe any others of you also, Zayaan maybe, or Aaniyah, Any comments on that? And you don't have to. I don't want to put anybody on any spot at all ever. So we can maybe leave that for.
Can I just ask a question? I'm not quite sure what the question is when you say, who were we writing for?
I mean, I think
the authors in each of all over the various chapters you're saying.
Yeah, but I think
Okay.
you're always as editor, you also have, I mean, it's this whole thing about especially the way you were describing that process of developing, finding, developing, working with new methodologies. Yeah, who were you writing it for? And I think, Zayaan, you wanted to talk, so let me hand over.
No, all I wanted to say was, I think as South Africans at this stage of democracy, we're so used to always being biased. We're so used to bias as part of, it's the name of the game, you know, and we work very hard to unfurl the boundaries of that and to understand how we've internalized that bias and how we can destroy it, which is very difficult because you come from a specific culture in a specific time in a specific body, and so I'm just consciously aware of what in my acting in every day and my being in every day, what that is. And so committing something to the archive, in this case in writing, you have to be very mindful and very careful. But also fundamentally, when you're writing autoethnographically, there's a little bit of space for kindness and to speak from a place that doesn't have to be completely, what's the word? Inclusive, I guess. But I find myself, the more that I write and the more that I live, to shedding the bias also around everyone else that lives. So all the insects and all the bacteria and all the plants and animals and soils and waters and rocks, and trying to kind of emulate a sense of what I wish for the world and what I hope my children will understand, you know, in their lives and their potentially continual descendants.
Wow. That's lovely. Anyone who would like to add to that, respond to that? I can also see you, Aaniyah.
Yeah. Thank you, Zayaan. That was really beautifully said. I think for me, it was also about arriving in this place where other ways of making knowledge are almost accepted, you know? So this transdisciplinarity is something I've been searching for and trying to practice before. You know, I've always been interested in environmental and social issues, but I could never find the place in between. And yeah, it's now through doing my doctoral research that I've been able to do that. And so finding home through writing and through being able to share many parts of myself, like Zayaan said, you know, it's deeply personal as well. And so finding a place to share that has been very meaningful and important for me.
Fabulous. Nikki, I also saw you wanting to come in earlier.
No, it was more trying to understand because you had put that question under the chapter 10, and then but I got that it was for others. But I've been trying to think about, I mean, I was writing to learn. And then I suppose if I'm thinking who was I writing for, it might be for people who are also trying to figure out and find a way of writing that works for them. So not in a formulaic way at all. I was just so incredibly grateful that I had that opportunity and continue to use it now to help me understand myself and not just myself, but understand how I can do this work in a way that makes sense to me. And similarly to Aaniyah, although from a different perspective, is that I come from a fine art background or a visual art background. And so for me, this whole kind of the segue into the wordy academy was terrifying, and continues to be honest. And it somehow opened up possibilities of learning and doing that worked. Yeah.
So it's also alluding to different kinds of differences in terms of experience, academic experience, and
for me, I think that you know that we were initially not writing for an audience at all. I mean, in our writing it was for ourselves to share with each other. So it wasn't ever meant to be going out into the public. But I am always conscious, because this is part of an NRF project, and because I have PhD students who are, many of whom are doing their PhDs through publication, of making opportunities available. So there was a special issue in the Crystal Journal, which, many people who also wrote in the book wrote pieces in that. So it's opportunities provided, for PhD, and this is a conscious thing, because I think to flounder around and to try and find, unless you're a very seasoned scholar, try and find journals and that sort of thing is a very difficult thing, and it can be a very bruising process, because you can get hectic feedback and reviewing. It is a very time-consuming. I mean, I've done it with PhD students who are seasoned scholars, and even for them, it is difficult. So I must be frank that I look for opportunities for my PhD students to write books, chapters in books. I do special issues where they can also participate. So that for me was a large part of many of the book projects that I've been involved in, and special issues.
okay. And is that at all connected to the notion of justice to come that kept coming up in our reading groups?
Well, I think also, justice to come, of course, came from Jacques Derrida's book on spectres of Marx. And we had also written a book on hauntology, where Tammy had written a chapter on the sea. That was some time ago, and the subtitle was A Justice to Come. So we were interested in the notion of justice to come, because it is an ongoing thing, where this notion of non-innocence, that it's not something that is ever achieved, but it's something that is always being worked towards. It is not possible to ever achieve it.
Don't
So
know. Because there are,
Yeah.
that was maybe in, is that, I don't want to put the person who asked this amazing question on the spot, but if you want to come in, you can. And it had to do with concern about achieving, or who's achieving it, and whose agenda is it, if I remember well. So maybe more unpacking what kind of justice we're talking about. What do we mean by justice to come when we use the phrase, and And here also, whose justice, and can you say more about its temporalities? So it's like, is it, you say it's never to be achieved, but how do we know if it's not like the normal notion of justice, something that is put in the future as something that needs to be achieved, but it's something that, of course, Karin works with a lot, inspired by Derrida. Anyone, any comments how they use the term justice and how do we know we're not quite there yet? What does that mean? It is 5 o'clock South African time, so it is maybe a good time to open it up. Maybe it's a really amazing question to open up to the larger audience and also the people who generated the question, and maybe there are more in the questions. So shall we maybe give you a minute to let it sink and to develop your questions and then see where we all are. How many people are there? There we are. We've got 25 people in the room. Lovely to see people's bodies and how they would like to face us. Oh, lovely. Good to see you, Sherry. You've been contributing so much to the reading groups. It's lovely to see you here. Hi, Teresa. Okay, give you a couple of minutes to let the questions flow, cascade.
So are you just opening it up to all of us to contribute or ask more questions or?
Yep. So
Just
it's your time. The next half an hour, you might want to respond to what has been said so far. You might also want, there's one question that George already put in quite early on, and it has got 2 thumbs up. And I think we're still haunted by the one on justice to come, and we also maybe need to have a little bit more about slow scholarship. I don't know. There might be other questions. Joanne, thanks for your comment. There's insightful discussion. George's question. Teresa, you've got one?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to respond to and ask maybe some further detail, ask for the people who were speaking about justice to come, because I suppose the thing that comes to my mind immediately is the justice for the ocean as a body, So when Derrida speaks, is it an assumption of justice for humans, or is it some other kind of justice? Because I mean, I even understand in our own constitution, there's something about
ecological rights. So it's almost like beyond the human.
Okay, is it okay to George? Is it fine? You were first in terms of that question, but that's about slow scholarship. Let's pick up the justice to come. So anyone who would like to respond, it doesn't have to be the panel. It could be the panel, but it could be other people too. Justice to come, is it also justice? That includes the ocean and the more than human.
I can say something to that very briefly. Is that I think if justice is not all inclusive, then it's not just. I don't know if I should say more than that, but it must include. It must include justice for ocean. It must include all of that. And we're just in a time where extractive natures of capitalism and imperialism, you know, will eat themselves or burn themselves before they are destroyed. And so it's kind of the pushing over of the last dregs of the fall of this empire. But otherwise, it's not just.
Wow. Anyone who would like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think continuing from Zayaan, really, you know, it's not just, and in the same way, that's why we say justice to come, because it needs to be inclusive of the human and the more than human, and who's calling for the justice. There will always be an exclusion through that calling. So the justice to come for me is always in the making.
So Jackie is asking, I wonder though, include where? Might that be Therese? Okay, so I see that the Constitution focuses on humans having healthy environments. So it's a human-centered kind of focus on the more than human.
Yeah, it is very human. It states that
Yeah.
everyone has a right to a healthy environment.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
reading that, and back in my scientific day working in conservation, it was one of the posters I had in my office actually, and it's one that I stood by. And now coming to it with an agential realism, post-humanist view, I understand that it's very much human-centered, that clause in the Constitution.
And Jackie is saying, and I think the where is important. In terms of, Jackie, maybe you can say a little bit more. The where, you mean in geopolitical terms? I tried to find you in terms of including. Okay. In every terms. Okay.
I think if I may just,
Yeah.
for me, with where I find Bharat so helpful with regards justice to come is that it allows for a continual ongoing generation of onto ethical, political kind of interactive forces or effects that, I mean, I'm for some reason, what's coming up in my mind was Barry on Friday night talking about throwing that boulder into the water and another one, and those ripple effects kind of moving through each other and creating those diffractive patterns. And for me, that's what I think of with justice to come, is that it's firstly, it just in terms of those questions around innocence, it's never innocent. It's always haunted. It's always complex. And justice, as we know, isn't always good in terms of how we live it in the world. So it's kind of, for me, it opens it up always. It kind of keeps me on my toes in being able to think differently around what justice may be or what justice may become, and constantly throw up what it means to what my implicatedness is, what are ethically, what is not just mine, but what does responsibility really mean? What does ethical really mean? What does it not even mean? What does it do?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it brings up the performative. And I feel like I'm being all like theoretical here, but as you can see, I have to go for a swim in order to try and think this through.
No, not yet. Hey, but you do say something that I've got a question there about, that justice is not always good. Sherry, you've got your hand up, and there's also a comment from Joanne. Go on. Sherry?
Hi everyone. Yes, I just wanted to add to what Nikki was saying. It's for me, the justice to come is filled with all of the implications that exists. But more recently, I've thought about justice is also for the one who is able to do the better argument. So if you think about a court case, it isn't necessarily justice, but the one who's able to put together the best argument. And so for me, how research has included and excluded people is that for a long time, it had a mechanism that some people had a better way to argue their justice. And so even though it may or may not have been justice for all, like Zayaan has said, like all inclusive, that it's not justice if everyone isn't covered in that. And so the experience is that, in my experience, is that justice also comes to the one who is able to put the best argument together, like a lawyer, for example. It may not necessarily be the truth, it may not necessarily be how the facts actually happen, but the way that it's argued, how the string of events is put together, and how research is able to do that because of English, because of how more gesoute researchers are able to do that. For me, it also has that angle to it. So who has the better mechanisms to make justice work for whoever is in front of the audience or the jury at that moment? And then I just wanted to add to the slow scholarship that for me, I was very, very intrigued with slow scholarship. I thought it was the perfect way to kind of challenge and push back the kind of rigid wheels of academia that just kind of keeps on expecting us to perform and to deliver and to produce more and more and more. But I've also come to realize that the slow scholarship, in my case, may have not been my best strategy because I was already so late, so alone, so behind, so far away from others that slow may not have necessarily been my better strategy. And had it not been for strategies where special, well, not special, but different ways of finding ways to have access, like Viv was earlier saying, that especially looking out for ways for PhD students to be able to contribute to a chapter or contribute to a book or to a special edition. Without those like strategies, it would have been even slower for me. And like Nikki said, it was a way of learning how to write, how to do academia, and the slow was helpful when you're learning, but difficult when you're trying to operate in the academia. That was just my contribution. Thank you for the panelists for your insights.
It connects with Joanne Pearce's comment about, I would also like to add that we can't separate the constitution that was written from the history in South Africa, where very specific humans did not have access. So, and it's about access, and it's about language. And then Margaret, you've got quite some interesting comments here. I don't know whether you want to read it out yourself or whether you would like me to do that. Hi
there. Yeah, I'm doing a digital digital critical autoethnography using ePortfolio, Andra pedagogy, I would call it. And, you know, I hadn't heard the term slow research before, and I had just happened upon the announcement about this panel. And I'm sitting here at the edge of the Pacific Ocean on Vancouver Island, and fascinated by this idea of slow research, because I guess that's what I've been doing over the last number of years, but very land-based, except for when the first pandemic winter, I was living on the Red River and did a series of 3 snow labyrinths, and the last one was 0.75 kilometers of a continuous walking path on the snow. And I remember one day just lying down on the river, and that sense of the water just carrying everything away underneath, but the ice holding me up, and the ground holding the river up, and that sense of being one with the universe, I guess, and that that sense of connection really grounding how I'm approaching this work that I'm doing. And I just see so many connections. And I haven't read the book. I'm going to have to buy the book so I can read the chapters, because it sounds fascinating. And I see the connections between what you are doing in water, and I love the idea of research through water, and what I am doing on the land.
It's really worth checking out, Margaret, what you put in the chat. And I would like to connect it with George's question, you know, coming back and sort of the question about slow scholarship. Do you ever encounter feelings of doubt when engaging in slow alternative scholarships? So this might well be a nice moment to chuck it in, George.
If I may add that maybe the context of my question is that I've re-entered the academic world, and I'm feeling so inspired by all of the different kind of methodologies that I'm experiencing through this book, but then thinking about how I do that when there feels like there are all these rules. And also when you're walking on the beach and your mind wanders and you're thinking about other things, and then I don't know, just like, I feel like I imagine myself going, oh, but does this count? Is this scholarship? Am I like, when you're working outside of the rules, feels like you don't always know if you're going in the right direction.
So I can just, George, if I can just respond first, if it's okay. So I remember when at one of the NRF, on one of Viv's NRF projects, going to Montfleur, and I was just starting out, and I was firstly always full of doubt, slow, fast, doubt is part of it personally. But I remember someone saying to me, just write the thing and get it done, and then you can write what you want. And at the time I thought, oh, okay, but actually I don't, that it's not okay, that, because it's so much more than, well, that was the one thing, is that had I not taken time, or time taken me, it wouldn't have been as, or certainly for me, as meaningful. And I think the work is richer for it, I hope. But what was the other thing? Oh, it's gone out of my mind now. Maybe someone else can talk and then it'll come back to me in the meantime. Oh, I've remembered. Sorry, I've remembered, if I may. The other thing is that kind of doing it differently, and kind of what was frustrating is at the end of the day, you still have to write a thesis. You still have to, so as much as you push back and learn and think, there's still the frustration of fitting in with the norms of the academy. And I still don't know how that gets resolved. I mean, but I wanted the qualification. It was, you know, but it's, if I was doing an art piece, it would be very different to doing a PhD, if that makes sense.
Okay,
I
so
think that, sorry.
Yeah, Aaniyah, yeah.
Yeah, it speaks to Jaan's comment in the chat, but also what Sherry was saying about slow scholarship. You know, she was saying, you know, it was almost to her disadvantage to be slow. And so, yeah, taking one's time, like taking more time to do your research means, do you need more funding? You know, how does that work? Who has the ability to take their time doing research if funding constraints are an issue? In my case, I've been particularly lucky. I've really taken my time. I'm 46 years old and only doing my PhD now. And I have a family and I have a bursary, so I can do it. I have friends that have nice places where I can come to writing retreats. So I've made it work for me. And working at the same time as studying is no easy task. But coming back to George's question around getting lost or being uncertain, for me, that has been part of the journey. And had I not gotten lost, I mean, I had no idea that the mother hydro rug would be what it is. When I started out, it was very much experimental, very much call and response, slow in its approach. Fortunately, again, I've worked in the marine conservation sector, so I have all these connections and relationships with other nonprofit organizations who are doing work around social justice or environmental issues. So finding people that I could do the inquiry with was probably easier for someone like me, given my context. But the actual making of individual hydro rugs and the prompts around sharing ocean stories, I wasn't sure what would come of that, and pulling all of those individual pieces into what I'm calling the mother hydro rug, a full-on co-creation. It's not me. This piece is not me. So that's really opening yourself up to being vulnerable, which is part of the research process and part of being slow for me.
Yeah, it raises some very interesting political questions and ethical questions, right, about the slow scholarship. And Joanne is really supporting your comment there, George. You know, about a kind of privilege, maybe even if I dare say, to do that kind of thing, and depending on one's context. But I would like to maybe again go back to and they are connected, of course, about knowing what to do if you're aiming for, you know, working on or let yourself be guided by justice to come as a concept. And then Teresa, you just ask, well, okay, you know, because there is that kind of, and I know, you know, UCT so well, George, because I can remember one of my colleagues when we were talking about post-qualitative research, and he says, oh yeah, well, that's just like this, isn't it? So he was just throwing a piece of paper into, but there is something about uncertainty, but there is also much more guidance actually than maybe we make it out to be sometimes. And what would justice for the ocean mean if we think about in terms of normal notions of justice or justice to come? What difference does justice to come make in terms of the ocean, right? Is that your question, Teresa? You are muted.
Sorry, yeah. No, that was what I wondered about, yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And it's also something,
But-
Aaniyah, you were talking about earlier on. Yeah, Nikki?
No, I'm just thinking about the writing retreat and the gratitude and the privilege. And what it's come up for me is that I've been on different writing retreats, and one's hosted by the institution I work at, and I've been at ones that are part of the NRF project, various projects of Viv's as her doctoral student, and they're quite different. So it's not in that the ones with the university, there's quite a lot of pressure to produce because you wanted to publish, and you know there's it's part of that whole machine of generating money for the university, for the institution. If you publish and the university gets subsidies, I don't even know what the correct wording is. Whereas if I think of the times we had specifically around this book at Bosky Dell, and that it was writing retreats without which is again the slur, which was not with a publication in mind or an outcome in mind. It was, for me at any rate, it felt like it was building a community which continued to live on in the various WhatsApp groups.
I'm just aware of time, and I think there's the question from Teresa about justice to come, because there is still, I think there's the question still haunts us about what difference does that make between justice as a concept and justice to come. And then Teresa made it quite specific about what would that mean for the ocean. What are and you've talked before as well about responsibility, you know, what would it be like to respond to the ocean? What difference does it make for people who don't know let's have a look at people who haven't.
If no one else.
Go on. Yeah.
So again here, given my positionality and being a founder of the Beach Co-op, which is a nonprofit organization, and building a community in Cape Town specifically, so the justice for our oceans, there was a call, the Navy, I'm using an example, the Navy, the South African Navy, wanted to do some like testing in the ocean, very close to the penguin colony, in the marine protected area. There was an outcry, a public outcry. And in response to that, I started speaking to some of the scientists, some of the citizens, and we collaborated and decided to create a petition. And we got several people to sign this petition. And then in addition to that, we decided to do a silent protest and go for a swim close to the site where the missiles had been tested. And in response to that, we were lucky enough to snorkel and free dive with some short-tailed stingrays. And there were guitar sharks. And they were in close proximity to this area that was being targeted by the South African Navy. And since then, they decided to stop. So these are some of the ways. Then with the hydro rug specifically, sure, I've been focusing on Black and brown bodies and their stories, their relationship to water. But last week I was on a panel with the One Blue Heart, which is an event to raise funds for a marine turtle hospital. And while in discussion in the pre-meeting before the panel, I realized perhaps there'd be an opportunity for me to get beach plastic that turtles had ingested. And then there was, and what I've been stitching as we've been talking is actually the ghost net that a turtle carried on its back, 50 kilograms, and the turtle itself was 50 kilograms, and she survived. So I was really honored, deeply honored, to not only include in this Mother Hydro Rug the stories of Black and brown bodies, but the actual ghost net of a turtle. So that for me is bringing the justice of our ocean into the story.
So it sounds like justice as a concept.
Hang on. Sorry, Nikki. I'm just aware of time, and it was Teresa who posed the question. Teresa, does this help at all to answer that question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Aaniyah. Yeah, no, that really, I think it changes it helps to think about justice to come with those kinds of stories, I think.
And I wonder also, Sherry, you know, the thing about, is it ever reached, and to what extent, you know, with this, it is iterative in the sense of it's always in the doing, it's situated, it's never ending. But that's probably, you know, in a sense quite Buddhist, isn't it? It's never, it's not something to, you know, you've done it, you ticked it off and you move on. Yeah, so I don't know whether this helped you, because I know these were very important questions for you during the reading groups, and they just have been structuring our amazing session at this, for this panel, and maybe we'll pick it up again for the next panel.
Yeah, no, it was definitely. I think it's refreshing that it isn't something to achieve, and I think as humans, I think that's maybe something we have to unlearn, that this is maybe not something that we can tick off and say it's a thing, it's an ongoing thing, and I actually like that we will constantly be relooking, rechecking that justice is in the making.
Always in the making. So people have already saying goodbye. Genevieve, great that you were here. Other people as well. I just would like to hand over to George for the last kind of practical information. Sorry, Nikki, I had to cut you off, but it's just sort of my role, and we're running out of time. Okay. George, if you can just say where people can find the information about the reading group. We're going through the chapters, and then we finish again with a panel. And we're working all the way to mid-June to go through this amazing book. And here you can just click on this. There's all the information, and we slow read each of the chapters as we go along, which have been very expertly actually grouped and put together. And but do you want to say more, George?
Well, I was just going to say that if you go to upcoming events on our website, we do have the reading group information here. And if you'd like to join the reading group, you can message me. And then over here, there's a little button that takes you just to show the what's coming. So this is today's panel, and then we will start again next week with the reading group. And it's sort of just growing as it goes. So please feel free to join us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, panelists. Maybe people in the room can show their appreciation by using any of the, what are they called? The reactions in the, yes, thank you. Fabulous. Thank you very much for spending time together, thinking about these very important issues, and hope to see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
And thank you, George, in particular. All
Okay.
messages. Thank you, everyone.